everybody. So yes, my name is James. It's okay, you don't need to call me Dr. James, it's okay. And so I am a field CTO for a company called Remo Free. I'm actually 2 months into role there at Remo, and so I cover, I suppose, pretty much a lot of stuff really, as we're a small startup, so you have to get involved in a lot of things, but predominantly, I suppose, our community engagement, evangelism, alongside pre-sales, post-sales, Microsoft relationships, vendor relationships, partner relationships, pretty much anything and everything. So wherever there's a gap, I will try to fill that alongside my colleagues who do the same thing. So it's great to be all pushing in the same direction. And I recently left Microsoft, having done just over 5.5 years at Microsoft. So joined Microsoft as a mon-desktop TSP back then, so helping financial services customers understand what that journey to modern management looks like. And I could say, this was 5.5 years ago. There were some tough conversations back then, particularly with financial services customers. I would say when I tried to explain the process of Windows Autopilot to a big company that I spoke to, they just sort of looked at me like I was bloody mental. Absolutely, like, what the hell are you on about, mate? This is never going to work. And things are different now, I would say, and that's why I wanted to do this session to this community, because I think config manager to Intune is a real hot topic at the moment. For us at Remo Free, we see it as one of our, I suppose, our largest opportunities, particularly helping accelerate customers get their application estates out of config manager and into Intune. I think that's a big challenge, and I'm probably just spoiling the answer to the question. What is the holdup? But yeah, that's really what I wanted to do, and make this sort of a conversational session as well. So if anyone's got any experiences or going through, well, actually, anyone going through that pain right now of config manager to Intune from a customer perspective? Yeah, a few hands go up. So, well, good, it's relevant then. So hopefully you'll provide some insight into this session and take away some insight as well. So I'm going to cover a few topics in this session. First of all, I just want to level set in terms of what I mean by a cloud-native Windows endpoint. So very much a Windows-focused session, this will be. So all around being able to shift that management of the Windows estate from config manager to Intune. And when I say Intune, I mean fully native Intune, not this sort of halfway house that many customers are in with co-management. I think this is what we want to do, is really shift all the way over to Intune. And so once we do the level set, we can talk around, I suppose, the business value of making that move. And some of those will be quite obvious, but I also want to touch on some of the user experience value. So just go beyond to the physical dollars sign, pound sign around decommissioning an infrastructure, but more around some of the softer improvements. And then talk about the various options of how to get there. So more from a Microsoft-centric approach, how Microsoft feel that the journey that customers should go on to get to Intune, and what the options are available, and some of the things that customers need to consider on that journey. And then I will get to the big reveal around what is actually stopping us on that journey, which I've sort of given away. But I'll go into a bit more detail around the options around it. So, just time check. So first of all, what is this sort of cloud-native Windows endpoint? What do I mean by that? So this is something that I've been talking about for many years, and it's very much cloud-managed device. So an Intune-enrolled Windows endpoint, Azure Active Directory joined, so not hybrid joined, typically deployed by Windows Autopilot. And this now sort of stretches beyond the physical device, particularly when Microsoft released Windows 365 as well. And of course, we have cloud VDI options with AVD, but typically where we look at that single session personal desktop, whether that's physical, virtual, all managed by the clouds, cloud identity joined, and secured via the cloud as well. And so to get there, there's going to need a bit of a culture change, definitely, across customers. So I don't know how clear that is on this screen. Yeah, I don't think the red and dark blue have gone well with this contrast. But essentially, there's a few areas from a technology perspective that customers are going to need to pivot away from. So if we think about that sort of traditional customized image approach to Windows Autopilot as an example, moving away from this sort of patching infrastructure or manual deployment of patches to Windows Endpoint and leveraging some of the Microsoft tooling that's available, whether using Windows Update for Business policies, leveraging the Microsoft CDN to deliver those patches, or even go one step further and look at Windows Auto Patch as an example as well. And so Windows Auto Patch being I suppose, Microsoft giving up on the MMD idea and just scaling that back with auto patches as what is MMD right now. And that's essentially Microsoft almost deploying and managing those update rings for a customer. And of course, GPOs is a big one as well. So getting GPOs and looking at Intune settings catalog. Again, when I first started these conversations many years ago, there wasn't a lot in Intune from a GUI perspective. It was very limited in terms of what you could do from a configuration policy perspective, and therefore you needed to create a lot of custom policies to close those gaps. And we also had Microsoft had the MMAT tool back then. Don't ask me what it stands for, I've totally forgotten. But did anybody use the MMAT tool back then? So it was almost this tool that would read your GPOs and be able to give you what that translation into Intune policies would be. So, thank you, John. One person used it, so that's good. Do you remember what MMAT stood for? Something like Migration Admin Tool or something. So moving on, and then when we talk about the device as well, so moving to more modern devices, I've got here sort of non-touch devices. I don't know, many people use a MacBook. I keep touching Dave's and my colleagues' MacBooks all the time because I think it's touchscreen and it's not. And this one here, I did doing this earlier, still baffles me. But for me, coming from Microsoft, I'm just get so used to modern ways of interacting with devices now. It sounds a bit cheesy, but it is part of that. When we think about providing a rich user experience, some of those things are quite important to many users, just having modern devices and modern ways of interacting with those devices. And of course, applications, thinking about how we manage those differently. So ideally managing from the cloud as that single source of truth to host and deliver those applications via Intune. And then of course we have third-party security agents as well. Traditionally, they have plagued the user experience with various pop-ups, killing performance, point solutions to solve point problems, companies buying, I suppose, best of breed, top right Gartner Magic Quadrants, products to fill gaps, always been, whilst they solve problems, was fantastic, but in terms of that ecosystem of products that can talk to each other and not sort of step on each other's toes, I think has been traditionally a challenge. So again, from a very Microsoft-centric approach, it's leveraging Microsoft native security tools to provide that sort of seamless experience for end users, agentless, non-impacting performance security tools. And finally, we think about this moving away from this reactive support to end users. So traditional user has a problem, calls up the help desk, but how about we leverage analytics to provide proactive insights to solve problems before they happen, or enable self-service for end users as well to solve their own challenges. And of course, we have many fantastic vendors in the ecosystem as well that can provide those types of offerings from an employee experience perspective, particularly around digital employee experience and end user sentiment and feedback as well. Great products on the market that can help that. But what it boils down to really, we see 5 sort of common components of this sort of common end user computing experience that drives what we see as the sort of the cloud native Windows endpoint. So some of these I've touched on already, but first of all users need a device, so to allow them to get the work done. So it could be mobile devices, tablets, 2-in-1s, traditional desktops, laptops. I know there might have been an argument earlier whether everyone uses laptops, but yeah, desktops still in use as well. And second, each of those devices run an OS, so this OS needs to be easy to manage, easy to update, keeps everything secure, and it needs to be something that users find consistent and easy to use. And then from a management perspective, we want to think about providing, I suppose, single pane of glass or unified cloud-based management solution that can manage all of the devices in the estate and all of the OSs, including the mobile devices, tablets, etc., and even the virtual endpoints as well. When we think about this future of managing an endpoint estate, we want it to be as simple as possible and have as little windows that we need to navigate as we can. And this device, OS, and management solution, they need to reinforce security on the endpoint as well, so really protecting the organization, its users and customers, as well as any sensitive data, and of course all without disrupting productivity as well. And of course end users need applications to get their job done as well, so whether that's the office applications, line of business applications, whatever that may be, SaaS applications, super important to the user experience as well, so we need to take those into consideration as well when we think about those 5 principles. So essentially what we want to do is really get to everything in the blue box, right, that you see up there. So moving away from this manual deployment approach of imaging devices, constantly developing, maintaining custom images, and moving to this zero-touch deployment methodology with autopilot, moving to cloud identity, and managing and deploying apps via Intune where we can. And yeah, we can get there via code management as a sort of stopgap, but ultimately it's time to try and move to this fully cloud-native approach. So when we look at the device, as I said earlier, it could be physical, could be virtual. With the physical, we want to provide that modern experience and modern deployment methodology, less touch by IT, but getting those endpoints to the users to help them, for them to be provisioned by the end user directly. And of course, we see more homework in these days, so ideally they just want to be delivered to the end user's home address and they can be provisioned right out of the box. That's the ideal scenario that we're aiming for. And then we're also in this sort of golden age of virtualization to a certain extent, you could say, where we have a couple of the sort of, when we really boils down to it, we have 2 real key options, of course, different flavors with AVD, but we typically have Windows 365 and AVD as the 2 main options now for virtualization, right? Particularly Cloud VDI. So with Windows 365, other clouds are available, of course. Sorry, I didn't hear that. For the purpose of the recording, Jim said Oracle Cloud. So with Windows 365 providing that, I suppose SaaS VDI is probably a nice way of putting it, but single session, personal desktops, nice and simple, predictable costs per user per month, and easy provisioning. John had his session earlier, how straightforward and simple it is to deploy and manage Windows 365 Cloud PC. And then of course you have the opposite end of that spectrum with AVD providing that sort of full customization option, flexibility, optimization, multi-session, single session, remote app options. Yeah, just for customers that want that flexibility and choice and are able to invest to optimize that experience, or they just use Nerdio to make it straightforward and simple. And of course, all of these options running Windows 10 or Windows 11, cloud deployed and managed via Intune. And then from an OS perspective, we're looking at typically these days Windows 10 and Windows 11. Of course, Windows 10 has that date now looming over us that is getting ever closer and closer, so October 2025. So I think that's going to be more prevalent for customers as we get closer to that date. Any customers in the room on that journey to Windows 11 right now? A few nods, a few hands up. I certainly think it's been, I suppose when I was at Microsoft, it wasn't the launch Microsoft would be expecting it to be. I think it was definitely seen as more consumer focused, the Windows 11 launch. I'm sure you'll agree. But I know in recent times, I think Dave Weston has been wheeled out to provide more security features around Windows 11, particularly around looking at the applications is his current view at the moment around providing sort of secure app containers, which is quite interesting. But definitely they've sort of stepped up their game around providing a more enterprise experience, enterprise features for Windows 11. So hopefully that's sort of driving more incentive for customers to move to Windows 11. And then, of course, there will always be app compat challenges, whilst the headline is that it's 99 point blah, blah, blah app compats on Windows 10 and Windows 10 to 11. There's always going to be issues, right, particularly around in-house custom applications. We know that. But we also have customers that, application failures or downtime is big money, big risk here. So there will always be that need for customers to validate apps before deploying updates or moving from 10 to 11. So I think it's accepting that is something that needs to be taken into consideration on this journey. And then from a servicing perspective, definitely think about sort of the endpoint analytics available to, from a Windows 11 perspective, provide sort of that hardware compatibility readiness that's available. And then we think about the options around servicing that Windows estate. So again, leveraging Windows Update to Business to manage those OS updates, leveraging the Microsoft CDN to deliver those updates, and looking at Windows Auto Patch to automatically create those update rings for us and be able to manage that experience a lot more slicker if you have that confidence to be able to let those rings manage those updates for you. But again, there are considerations if there are app testing within those rings that we need to think about, and how we can do that in a slick way without impacting end user sort of time by asking them to test business apps as part of their day job when it's not their day job. And then from a management perspective, it's really that shift to Intune, and of course co-management can be that stepping stone as we move from config manager to Intune. So essentially fully moving then to this cloud-based zero-touch device deployment and rollout of Windows 365 devices. And of course, we've got the iOS and Android management, Mac management that comes with that as well when you think about the wider estate. And typically wrapping in those configuration policies, but also think about your security policies as well via Intune now, whether that's leveraging the security baselines as your starting point. And of course, things like MFA and integration with Azure Active Directory as well. Great thing with scope tagging as well in Intune is fantastic to use for RBAC controls around the Intune admin experience as well. And ideally, I think the greatest thing about Intune is there's no additional agents that's needed, so all built into Windows, nothing bolted on, providing that sort of slick performance and reliability. And of course, if you didn't feel you were getting value from your Intune investment, you can always purchase the Intune suite for extra products and features. And so Microsoft released remote help as that additional option. I think when they released it as a standalone option, it was quite pricey compared to what was there previously. But I think there is starting to see some value picking up now. There's more features in there, such as the endpoint privilege management is quite exciting one. And of course, we've got the advanced analytics as well to provide some more proactive insights for us. And then from a security perspective, it's really about getting to Azure Active Directory, joined devices. And really when we think about that I suppose, that zero trust model, particularly around the conditional access policies that we built to gate access to corporate resources. We've got our different sort of, I suppose, data points that we need to consider, and device is always a key component of that. So with that cloud managed device, we can start to wrap compliance policies around that to ensure that we control what we see as compliant for device to access resource. And also when we think about Defender for Endpoint enrollment as well, we can add the extra angle or extra signal around how healthy or how trustworthy is that device based on any alerts or incidents that have been raised that have included that device. So those rich signals allow us to ensure that only trusted devices, alongside identity and other factors and data points that we consider as important, are there to gate access to those corporate resources. And of course, we have options around Defender for Endpoint now, with P1 being available in M365 E3. So most customers will have pretty much decent functionality of Defender for Endpoint available to them in their subscription. But of course, if they want that automated incident response, then it's Defender for Endpoint P2 as an option as well to step up. And then the application's super important as well. So whether it's Teams, whether it's Office, apps, but we need to think about how we actually get those line of business applications into Intune and some of the challenges around there, particularly with Windows Package Manager coming on the scene now. That presents some interesting options for us. So Microsoft have already provided that new store integration. So the store, I suppose, the public repository of applications, and that integration with Intune, but we're going to start to see more private repositories coming on the scene as well, hosting those customer packages. So suddenly that opens up more options. So suddenly we can think about store apps, we can think about private repositories, we can think about Intune native applications as well. So those applications that we add to Intune as we do today, whether Intune Win files or MSIX apps or any other sort of standard app formats as well. So that's going to be interesting to navigate on what Microsoft will choose to do around the Intune storage location, because I don't know, I can imagine there's a monetization with potentially private repos compared to Microsoft currently footing the bill for the Intune content delivery network. So is there an angle there? I don't know, I'm just speculating here, but it's almost something for consideration. Of course, we have app limits on Intune as well, got the 8 gig app limit, so suddenly that can open up that for the larger, more complex applications as well. And essentially, still on the Windows cloud native endpoint, but all of this delivered and managed via Intune, and moving to the settings catalog, compliance policies, applications delivery and security policies, all via Intune, autopilot for deployment, and of course we have the cloud VDI options as well. And there's opportunities, particularly around vendors out there, to add value to this. So particularly we see partners wrapping managed services around this opportunity. So there's the professional services opportunity to get the customer to this point, and then also the managed services opportunity to manage this. Microsoft tried it, but I think it's best with the partner community or customers doing it themselves. And of course there are opportunities around Nerdio and for both Intune, the applications, and the AVD and Windows 365 environment is great, and also Liquid for the apps as well, from that app storefront perspective as well. So there's great options where multiple vendors can sit in that, or customers can do it themselves or via partner. So that's sort of level setting around what I mean by the sort of cloud native Windows endpoint. And I'm just going to sort of pivot to what is the business value of decommissioning that configuration manager and moving fully to cloud native Intune. So a couple of bits and pieces I've taken from Microsoft as sources. So with this one, this was from the Total Economic Impact study for Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And to be honest, like in doing research around the business benefits of decommissioning Config Manager, like I couldn't really find anything that focused purely on Intune native. It's almost like Microsoft are happy for customers to stay in this halfway house of co-management. And I think that's really the problem that hasn't been solved in the community, is just how do customers really fully move away from Config Manager? And it's just, and even when I look at some of the business value, it's always in the mind of sort of co-management and having that single pane of glass to manage the estates, and like quoted things like, for example, learned that in organizations based on aggregated experiences and customer interviews, customers have realized almost $500,000 of savings in human capital through the utilization of the Microsoft solution. I don't really know what that means, essentially. But I suppose what they're saying is if their FTEs don't need to manage 2 consoles, then it saves half the time, perhaps, right? So if they're not managing Config Manager and Intune, just all through Intune, then yeah, of course it saves half the time, right? But there are some parallels we can make. So this data was taken from a study that was done for MMD, so a Qualtrics study. And so this is very much related to that sort of cloud-managed, cloud-deployed device. So what we saw was a massive, a whopping 85% reduction in boot times. So this is typically taken up from probably logon scripts, GPOs being deployed, real complex environments happening at boot time and login. So taking a vanilla image straight from out of the box, and end users logging in really saw massive, and we see that. So for any of us in here that have an Intune managed device, pretty much where we go through that self-provisioning process, we see great boot times these days. It's pretty much the norm if we've got an SSD in there as well. Reduction in crashes, another huge one, and probably a big one is the battery life as well. So obviously no sort of background processes running through legacy or inefficient applications. So massive improvements there from that very simple and straightforward experience. From an IT perspective, they would see a reduction in help desk calls, huge reduction in them doing that end user device setup time. Of course, no longer sitting in their labs building end user devices, less time in factories and so on and so forth of provisioning devices. And of course, that would lead to FTE hours reclaimed from doing that type of stuff, so they can be getting on with exciting new projects instead. And then from a leadership perspective, they then start to see that better CSAT experience, so better employee engagement, better employee impact, and better employee effectiveness. So less time, probably employees turning on their computer, desktop, and walking away for 10 minutes and coming back, and hopefully it's ready to sign in, those good old experiences that we all remember. And that improves employee sentiment because they're on a modern device, modern experience, and that improves Net Promoter Score as well. So all positive, I would say. And then when we think about more, I suppose, quantitative costs maybe, or just very specific costs around decommissioning an infrastructure, a few of the points, like pretty obvious, I would say. Hardware costs, of course, so Config Manager, sits on Windows Server, sits on a server. You could host it in Azure, of course, but of course that will still cost you as well. But if we think about a distributed, complex Config Manager environment where you've got multiple distribution points, a real sort of geographic spread of end users, so you need that high availability, failover, DR, business continuity, all that good stuff, that's going to cost you. And you're going to have to feed and water that estate. It's going to have to be in a position where it can scale as well. If you go through acquisitions, or if you, as you add users, so it needs to scale with your end user base. If you're hosting it in data centers, data center costs as well need to be considered, environmental factors, electricity, all that stuff, everything's going in that upwards direction. So all of that impacts the bottom line and impacts the cost of managing a physical infrastructure. So some real like key benefits to getting away from it, I would say. And of course the manpower to run it as well. And we almost think about like as technologies start to sunset, we see the cost of those resources that still possess that skill set going higher and higher, right? So suddenly when there's less of you that have that skill set, you can start to charge more to the customer for those skills. And yeah, I'm using that insight because I was speaking to somebody who does work for a Citrix partner last night, and he was seeing that on his horizon. And I think, yeah, this slide is just more of a repeat, some of the key things on here, yeah. So electricity costs will be high, pretty much, standard stuff, right? So when decommissioning any physical infrastructure. But hey, how do we get there? So we have some options that Microsoft provide, and this is very much taken from a Microsoft slide deck in terms of helping customers understand the value of moving to Intune. So we cover 4 key scenarios. So for customers with limited or no existing management tools, so really easy option for them, right? They can just go straight to Intune, no drama. Then we have customers with some existing cloud management, so they have started that journey. And then we also start them to get a bit more complex, so primarily on-prem management plus some cloud, and then all the way down to the far end of the scale where we've got significant complex existing on-prem infrastructure. So how do we tackle each of these? So again, with the new sort of greenfield customers, straightforward, straight to Intune, because it would make sense, right? So you can just push your apps to Intune, start building out those policies. Very rare that we would come across these types of scenarios, unless you're building a new company yourself. But it's good to have that scenario covered. And then for those customers that are existing, really it's just moving more endpoints to Intune, finding more scenarios. And I think that would go hand in hand with probably an application migration journey, I would say, as we move more of those end user applications into Intune, that will light up more end users, more scenarios as well. And that can really vary by each role and each persona as well, right? But I think we typically start with the lightweight users. I think we used to call them the road warriors in the day, but I think it's pretty much most home workers these days, where very straightforward set of applications, knowledge workers, whereby typically just using Office and a few other maybe web apps, SaaS apps as well to do their job, and they're very straightforward, sort of low-hanging fruit for Intune, and then we hold off on the more complex options as well. But then when we look at the more complexity for those customers that are sort of at the early stages of that journey, then of course co-management is the right place to go. So this enables customers to almost provide that sort of halfway house or at your pace journey to Intune. So those familiar with co-management, it's been around quite a few years now, so we can start to move the sliders over to Intune. So compliance policies, device configuration policies, the client apps, how we manage Office deployments and updates, Windows updates as well. We have the ability to sort of shift those workloads, those sliders, over to Intune. And typically where customers start, you would probably start at compliance, because it comes with the least risk, I suppose, and the highest value, because that helps enable, as I mentioned earlier, when we think about those conditional access policies, zero trust methodologies, etc., makes sense to start. That's managed in the cloud, so let's move that workload into the cloud as the first option. And then we can look at Windows updates as well. So if you're looking at moving from WSUS and sort of more complex managing updates on-prem and having to download and store updates, and think about how you distribute those across your organization, like Windows Update for Business and leveraging the Microsoft CDN makes total sense, right? And you can start to use peer-to-peer and other technologies to really lower the burden on your network infrastructure. And then finally, like the client apps is an interesting one. It's always this sort of misconception there. What does that actually mean when I shift that client apps lever over to Intune? And it's really straightforward, really. It's just in the company portal, you'll see your software center apps and your Intune delivered apps. So really, it's just centralizing the location where end users can get those apps. So you're not really turning off Config Manager by moving that lever. And sometimes that's probably the last lever to switch because it's like, I don't want to turn off Config Manager yet, but that doesn't actually have that effect. I think it could have been clearer, maybe, that lever. And then for those customers who aren't on that journey at all yet, who are still just purely Config Manager, Tenant Attached is probably the first choice to go with. And essentially you are just connecting that Config Manager environment to Intune, so you're not impacting the end user devices at all. There's no enrollment of devices into Intune. It's purely a infrastructure to infrastructure connection. And then some of the benefits that come with that. So endpoint analytics is number one benefit, because then suddenly you can start to see interesting insights about your on-prem devices via the Config Manager client. And then Microsoft did light up what they called the help desk persona as their first sort of vision of this tenant attached process. So essentially this was the ability to have visibility of your on-prem Config Manager managed devices in Intune. And from there you can almost, you can interact with the Config Manager client via Intune. So start to do things like WM pivots. You can also deploy configuration manager applications via Intune as well. Run scripts, do all sorts of lovely fancy things via Intune. So it was almost that vision of moving customers to that single pane of glass as that first step to get them more used to Intune and familiar with Intune before moving on to the next stage of co-management. So almost it was Microsoft came up with these ways almost to create a really soft and nice fluffy journey to Intune for customers. But I still think there still just doesn't solve the one problem, and that is the applications, I would say, is still the big one. So co-management doesn't solve it, Tenant Attached doesn't solve it, and there is no real answer other than throwing bodies at the problem, really, of moving those applications from Config Managed to Intune. It's an exercise that just needs to be done. That's where we're looking to convert to MSIX as your destination. Again, that is a painful journey in itself, or just having to manually wrap those applications in an Intune Win wrapper as well. Again, less of pain than MSIX, but still a journey in itself. And so what does that sort of future look like for applications via Intune? And it's quite funny, actually, because all of the slides so far, I'm not going to say the word stolen. I borrowed for the purpose of the camera. They were already on my OneDrive, sir. So I used them in this deck. But where I could not find a single slide from Microsoft was on how you get those applications from where they are today to Intune. Couldn't find anything. So if anyone can find anything, please let me know. But I had to go at building this slide myself in terms of what that future of app delivery via Intune or app management via Intune looks like. I sort of said it at the top of the session as well. So we can see that we still have the opportunity to put applications in Intune. So whether it's Intune Win, MSIX, line of business applications, store apps, etc., that exists today and is possible to assign those, whether required or available via company portal, to deploy. But then we've got this sort of new technology around sort of WPM, Winget, whatever you prefer to call it, where essentially we will have these repositories of applications. So Microsoft have already started that by making that available with the store integration. So started to make applications available in the public repository that is tied into Intune and provide that seamless integration into the store, constant time. So therefore, customers can just pick reach in and grab those applications. They're also, as the next phase of Intune Suite, releasing advanced application management, I think it's called, or third-party app patching and packaging. So where they'll be encouraging ISVs to provide updated applications and pop them in the private repo, and Microsoft will confirm that, that they work with the latest version of Windows and they're secure, etc. So that's Microsoft looking to, I suppose, monetize the opportunity around third-party applications, but it still doesn't solve those line of business applications as well, right? So we will eventually have this choice where we start to create these private repos for those applications. Again, one of the benefits of the WPM repo is it's pretty agnostic when it comes to application package formats. And then we can get behind the scenes then to be able to just poll those repos and perform the installation on the actual end user device. But yeah, all of this requires effort, and that is essentially the hold-up, I would say, around why customers are not there with cloud-native Intune. Feel free to disagree with me or challenge me, but I think that is probably number one reason why all customers are not on cloud-native Intune today, because very simply, it's time and money. So there needs to be a better way, and maybe there's some partners out there that have a better way of getting them there. So feel free, if you want a further chat with me, I'm happy to explore that with you. But being a community session, I'm not going to say who. So thank you. So in this session, I hope I didn't bore you to death too much. I wanted to be quite light and just, to end the day nicely. But essentially, I covered on what is that cloud-native Windows endpoint? What does that business case look like? What are the options to getting there? But really, what is actually stopping us? What is that real reason why everybody isn't using Intune today for Windows management? So how do we sort of look at this? So think about where you are on that journey. Is it really the apps that are blocking you? You might be a little bit further down the way, but you've got to take your apps with you. So you really need to consider it. And if you're a customer, think about putting some budget aside for it, because it will cost money, right? Time, effort costs money. So you need to budget it, definitely. Don't keep kicking the can down the road. And form a plan and work with your lovely partners that are out there, whether that's services partner or the value add partners, vendors that we have here with us today. And then build your business case. And that's the end of my session. Any questions or points anyone wants to raise? Please.
I thought I'd share a couple of personal experiences in terms of getting to Intune. One is the single tenanted nature of Intune. I've seen that it's generally tied to your Azure AD, and that's one tenant for the whole organization. And if you want to create separate environments, like dev environments, test environments, you generally only have one Intune, right? So then you're into like the tagging and creating RBAC, and it becomes quite complex. And historically, Intune tends to have been owned by the mobile team, right, to manage mobile devices. And suddenly all us EUC guys just rock up and say, right, now we want to start managing Windows machines and deploying apps and replacing GPOs and policies, and they're all like, it's like, well, we just use it to manage iPhones, right? And suddenly it's become this huge piece of work, and there's a lot of legacy in there, and so that's another challenge that I've seen in terms of adopting Intune to replace GPOs and to replace, config manager and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely.
And the mobile team are suddenly like, all these people knocking down their doors, it's like, we just use it to manage iPhones.
Yeah, it's a good old MDM tool.
Exactly,
Yeah, I definitely see more customers using scope tags to actually manage that global tenant, and then obviously they can start to really give different personas, different views, and start to almost turn it into a facade of multi-tenantis, but it's not really, it's still single tenant, and it's hard pre-prod and production.
Very few people seem to build like Intune greenfield, because it's generally always been used to do a bit of MDM in the past. So there's always generally some legacy stuff in there, and then it's really hard to then say, actually this is what it should look like, with all the proper RBAC and scope tags and stuff like that, and then you try to squeeze in all the legacy MDM stuff that's been in there for 5 to 6 years. It's tricky.
Yeah, I think it's good. They should really look at providing that sort of pre-prod prods multi-tenant within a single AAD tenant, sort of provide that different option.
If you want to do proper release management and release your apps into dev, into promote to production, you know, none of that stuff's built in, so then you have to go and cook your own type, you know, structures code stuff and you know, manage the scope tags and release it, and it becomes enormously complex.
So you could use Intune management for that, sort of Intune management. So if you've got a dev environment and a prod environment, use Intune management to export all your JSONs and stuff and import them into the prods. That way, that's really what we're doing.
Yeah, you could do that. The challenge is, though, it's still the applications, right? You cannot, in any supported fashion, without doing some pretty hairy stuff, is download those packages or export them from Intune. Once they're up there, they're encrypted, and yeah, it's very hard to actually pull them.
If you're using like Windows, you've probably got the packages loaded anyway.
Yep, yeah, you would still have the source packages likely.
Any more questions, comments? We've got the round table as well, so we can.
Something we find with Intune would stop us is Intune and AAD is all assigning stuff to an AAD group, a very device-based group and a user-based group. And to populate that group with very, very limited rules and use controls and config management, build a collection based on any kind of prompt, very, very specific or generic. And we then find that if we have to move something to Intune, still need SCCM, you have to do the SCCM AAD sync. So you keep an SCCM for something because Intune or AAD don't have the capability.
But would dynamic groups help that? AAD
No,
dynamic
so
group?
the properties you can use for a dynamic group are extremely small.
Yeah, used to have.
Deprecated OU, like OU mesh. So if you were to separate your business within OUs, you can't create dynamic device groups based on that.
Well, if you're going cloud native, there's no use anyway, right?
Right?
If you're going cloud native, no use don't exist anyway.
I see the sentiment. Yeah, in config manager, those collection group rules were just, you had so many options, all the options under the sun. It's another example of like one of the limitations or wasn't brought over with Intune. I think they've done a good job in terms of expanding the settings catalog, and they've put a lot of focus in that. But maybe that's another area that needs to be considered as well, adding more options around dynamic rules.